I'll never forget the day my uncle, Obi, stormed into our compound, his face tight with frustration. "Kene," he called, shaking a piece of paper in the air. "Do you know what this is?" I had no idea what was happening, but the tone in his voice was enough to send a chill down my spine. Obi wasn't the kind of man to raise his voice unless something serious was going on. He was usually calm, always cracking jokes or humming songs from his youth. Seeing him this upset was unsettling. He thrust the paper at me, and I squinted at the unfamiliar words and numbers. "They said I owe money," he grumbled. "But I paid for everything. My farm, my goats, my market store, I worked hard for all of it. So why am I owing anyone?" I didn't know how to respond. Obi was one of the hardest working people I knew, always up before the sun, tilling his fields or carrying yams to the market. If anyone deserved to enjoy the fruits of their labor, it was him. But here he was, clutching a demand for payment he didn't understand. As the youngest in the family and the one good with books, everyone looked to me for answers. So I did what I always do, I started asking questions. "Uncle, where did this come from?" "The village office," he replied. "They sent it through a messenger." I thought it was a mistake, but my neighbor got one too. "What kind of nonsense is this?" I took the paper and studied it closely. The language was dry and official, the kind that made your head hurt if you looked at it too long. But one word kept jumping out: levy. It wasn't clear what it was for or how it was calculated, but one thing was obvious: this wasn't going away on its own. The next day, I decided to investigate. I visited the village office, a small, dusty building near the market square. Inside, there was a man behind a wooden desk, looking half asleep. I cleared my throat, and he looked up, startled. "Good morning, sir," I began politely. "I'm here about this paper my uncle received. It says he owes a levy. Can you explain what it's for?" The clerk straightened up, adjusting his glasses. "Oh, yes. The levy is for community development projects. Roads, schools, health centers, all the things the village uses. Everyone contributes their share to make it possible." I nodded slowly, trying to process what he was saying. "But why now? My uncle has been working for years. He's never had to pay something like this before." "The elders decided it was time," the clerk said simply. "The village is growing, and we need more resources to keep up. This levy ensures that everyone, farmers, traders, even laborers, pays their part." I left the office with mixed feelings. On one hand, the explanation made sense. On the other hand, I knew it wouldn't make sense to Uncle Obi. He wasn't the kind of man to accept something just because an elder said so. He wanted things to be clear, to feel fair. And right now, this didn't feel fair at all. When I got home, I found Obi sitting under the mango tree, sharpening his machete. I joined him, holding the paper in my hand. "Uncle," I began carefully, "I went to the village office to ask about this levy." He grunted, not looking up. "And what did they say?" "They said it's for community projects. Things like roads and schools. They are asking everyone to contribute." Obi stopped sharpening his machete and looked at me. "Community projects," he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Did I ask them to build anything for me? Did I say I wanted new roads or schools? I've been doing fine on my own." I could feel his frustration, and I didn't blame him. Obi had always been self-reliant. He didn't like the idea of someone else deciding how his money should be spent. "I understand, Uncle," I said softly. "But these projects aren't just for you. They are for everyone. The roads help farmers take their goods to the market. The schools teach the children who will grow up to run the village. It's about making life better for all of us." Obi shook his head, his jaw tight. "It still feels wrong. I work hard for my money. Why should I give it away?" I didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. All I knew was that this levy wasn't going to disappear, no matter how unfair it felt. And somehow, I needed to find a way to help Obi understand. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the situation. I asked myself why it was so hard for people like Obi to accept the idea of contributing to something bigger than themselves. And then it hit me, most people never see the connection between what they give and what they get. They see the demand for money, but they don't see the benefits that come from it. That evening, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of arguing or explaining, I would tell Obi a story. Stories had a way of reaching people that facts and figures couldn't. And if anyone loved a good story, it was my uncle. Little did I know, the story I was about to tell would not only change how Obi saw the levy, but also how I understood the world around me. But that part of the journey was still ahead. For now, I had a story to craft, and a lesson to share. The next evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and red, I found Obi under the mango tree again. This time, he was mending a fishing net, his hands moving with practiced ease. I brought a stool and sat beside him, holding a calabash of water. "Uncle," I began, "can I tell you a story?" Obi paused and looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. He was suspicious, but curiosity won out. "Go on," he said, returning to his net. I took a deep breath. There was once a hunter who lived at the edge of the forest. He was known far and wide for his skill. No animal was too fast, no trail too faint. But there was one thing the hunter hated, sharing his fire. Obi glanced at me, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. I knew I had his attention now. Every evening, when the hunter returned from the forest, he would light a fire to cook his food and warm his bones. One day, a traveler passed by and asked to sit by the fire. "The night is cold, and I have no firewood," the traveler said. But the hunter refused. "This fire is mine," he said. "I gathered the wood. I lit the flame. If you want warmth, make your own fire." Obi grunted, nodding as if to say, "That sounds fair." The traveler moved on, and the hunter thought nothing of it. But as the days passed, more travelers came. Each one asked to share the fire, and each time, the hunter refused. "Why should I share what I worked for?" he said. I paused, letting the words sink in. Obi's hands had stopped moving. He was listening closely now. Then one day, a great storm swept through the forest. The wind howled, and the rain poured, drenching everything in its path. The hunter's fire was extinguished, and his firewood was soaked through. Cold and hungry, he ventured out to find help. But when he reached the first village, the people turned him away. "We would help you," they said, "but you never helped us when we needed you." Obi's brow furrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. The hunter wandered from village to village, but no one would share their fire. He had always believed he didn't need anyone, that his fire was enough. But now, he realized the truth: no one can stand alone forever. We all depend on each other, even if we don't see it right away. I leaned back, letting the story settle. Obi was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "So, you're saying this levy is like sharing the fire?" I nodded. "Exactly. The roads, the schools, the health centers, they're the fire. And the levy is the wood that keeps it burning. It's not just about what you give, it's about what we all build together." Obi sighed, shaking his head. "I still don't like it. But maybe it's not all nonsense after all." I smiled, knowing that was the closest I'd get to a victory. Change takes time, and understanding takes even longer. But that night, under the mango tree, I felt like we had taken the first step.